All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are picking back up again with the Joker. I don't know how many of you guys recall, we covered the first 4 issues a little while back. So we're going to add this to the Batman playlist, right? I mean, I feel like the Joker's had so few series over the years, there's not really a reason to make a playlist unto himself with 2 videos in it. So, here's the thing. In the last video, we basically ended kind of in the modern era, right? With this point where you had the Joker who was basically being tracked down by the daughter of Bane. This one actually kind of flashes back, and it basically gives us this sort of secret origin of the Joker, these things that we didn't know. And it actually focuses on the Joker's first night in Arkham Asylum, which is really cool because we never really saw how that played out, so I definitely dig it. Now again, a lot of the Joker's stories, or really most of the Joker's story, is told from the perspective of Commissioner Gordon, and that's really where we pick up, right? That at some point in the past, that Commissioner Gordon has largely had this really interesting story going on with his character, where it's kind of been this juxtaposition between how he was when he first arrived in Gotham from Chicago, and then like how he is now, and how much things have changed. And one of the things that he says is that he had an old partner in Chicago that said there were only 2 kinds of people in the world: those who ended up in the right place at the right time, and those who ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. And for the longest period of his life, he thought it was kind of nonsense, right? That there's more than 2 types of people in the world, and surely it's not circumstantial like that. Then he arrived in Gotham City. And while Gotham was not really the cesspool that we know it to be now at the time that Commissioner Gordon arrived, it was getting to that point. That largely you had the Falcone crime family and things like that. So it was really, it almost seemed like a holdover from the old days of the mob, right? You know, Pretty Boy Floyd, Al Capone, those guys, as opposed to, you know, what it would become with like the Joker and with Two-Face and Penguin and all those different guys. And so that's why he kind of tells it in retrospect that looking back on his life when he first arrived here, he was one of the guys who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so the way this plays out is there's really a couple of cops who have basically been, you know, caught up or snatched up by some guy. One of them's been shot, and the other one is basically being held hostage. Now there is Commissioner Gordon and a couple guys on the scene, but Gordon at this point in his life is a captain. He's not really a commissioner yet. So I just call him commissioner because honestly, I'm just used to saying Commissioner Gordon. But Gordon ends up busting in there. Now, this was a big deal because at the time it was a way for Gordon to kind of establish, look, I'm not just some captain who's going to sit idly by and let guys get shot, right? That's one of the things about Gordon is he's always been exceedingly adamant about protecting his cops, right? That when it comes to the various captains, and even when he became commissioner of the police department, he would go to the ends of the earth to make sure that his boys would never be injured in that way, or at least wouldn't be left hanging. And so this is really where a lot of that starts. When he goes busting into this room, there's basically this henchman that's got a gun in his hand going to shoot a cop, and Commissioner Gordon tackles him, and they go flying out of a window, right? And so kind of picking up after that, he's met by Harvey Dent. Now again, this is before Harvey Dent becomes Two-Face. And that's one of the cool things about this kind of story is because despite the fact that they're written in completely different eras, the reality is you could probably read this story and then go read The Long Halloween and basically get like the new origin of Harvey Dent. The important thing here is that Harvey, again, was never really an enemy of Gordon, right? He was never really an enemy of the police department. It's one of the big differences for those of you guys who saw like Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. That's one of the big differences. And one of the things that I thought was kind of intriguing is from time to time you would see Harvey operate in that way, but more often than not, especially in these early days, he was a friend to Gordon, right? And he was a friend to the police department in a lot of instances. And so that's one of the things that he kind of says, right? When they're talking, he's like, look, I mean, what you did was heroic, man, right? You're the hero of the hour. I mean, like, that guy would have been shot had you not jumped through there and tackled that guy through a window. And sure, he's probably going to sue you for excessive force, but we're the cops, right? We have ways to solve problems like that. And so it's one of these weird things, right? Because in this kind of conversation that the two of them are having, that there's also this idea that this guy had basically spilled a bunch of information about what was going on at Kelly Towers, that basically there'd be a way for them to crack down on the crime family, right? Specifically on Falcone, that there's some kind of a huge deal that's supposed to be going down at these towers, and this guy spilled the beans, basically sets the stage for them to be able to interrupt that deal and just kind of bust everything. Now, the funny thing about that is these guys immediately approach it from a little bit of skepticism, and that's just common sense, right? That's just intelligent thinking. You have to be some kind of fool to be like, yeah, man, this guy who's a career criminal, this guy told me a great big huge deal's going down, surely we can trust him. And so it's kind of like, I mean, this is the one thing to be aware of. This could be a trap, right? It's entirely possible. This guy's setting us up and we're going out there and they're going to kill as many cops as they possibly can. That's entirely possible. But at the end of the day, the juice is worth the squeeze, right? They're like, I mean, we can't let this kind of opportunity pass us by. We've got to do something. And so at that point, the conversation shifts over to the Joker. And the way this plays out, it really comes off the heels of the old school, Red Hood story. For those of you guys who recall, not Jason Todd Red Hood, but the story where the Joker operated under the mantle of Red Hood. So you could call it the Killing Joke if you want to, but whatever origin you agree with, at the end of the day, it all kind of comes down to the Joker being apprehended, or at least the guy who would become the Joker being apprehended by Batman, and then basically thrown in Arkham Asylum. The big difference here is that this is not really based on that tried and true origin. Most of those origins, when it comes to the Joker, usually involve the idea of him just kind of being some unsuspecting or some unwitting individual who was part of a criminal scheme. And it wasn't until later when he was dumped in the vat of chemicals and all that kind of stuff that he became the Joker, specifically if you cite the Killing Joke. And so what this does is it kind of hits on this idea that the Joker's engaged in a series of schemes already, and instead of just being thrown or at least kind of getting away or whatever the case is, that he's being put in Arkham Asylum. And so we know at this point the Joker's been operating for a little while, but it's the first time he's in Arkham. The other part of this, and this is one of the big issues when it comes to Gordon, is that somewhere along the line we knew that there were struggles between the relationship of his wife, himself, and his kids, that things were pretty strained. And in the later years we knew that they basically split up, but we didn't know exactly how all this stuff kind of went down. This all started with small little things. When he's talking to Harvey Dent and he's like, okay, tomorrow we can get together, we can go and check out this bust and try to grab some of Falcone's guys, possibly even arrest Falcone himself, bring him in on charges of whatever it was that he was doing, whatever he was smuggling, and then we'll essentially bring down the entire Falcone crime family, which would be that's a career bust. Those of you guys who don't know, when it comes to police officers, you have what are called career busts, which is basically a bust you make or an arrest you make that makes your career, right? That kind of solidifies you're the guy that has it where it counts, and you're the guy they want to see in an upper level position. And so ultimately that night is supposed to be his night off, and he's like, well, I mean, crime doesn't sleep, but like my kids will. So it's one of these things where like his family's kind of starting to take a back seat to all the stuff that he has going on, right? To his idea as a police officer trying to fight crime, that's becoming the foremost thing in his life. And so you pick up with a bit of a therapy session, not a whole lot going on here, and it's just one of these things where Commissioner Gordon is not necessarily blowing it off, but it's just kind of like, I mean, this meeting's running a little long, I got places to be. It's obvious he's only there because his wife wants him to be there, right? That's kind of the obvious situation here. And so what you end up doing is you transition over to Arkham Asylum. Now this is kind of interesting here because once you get to Arkham, as you guys know, Jeremiah Arkham is the one who's running it at this particular point in time. And you have a guy that Jim Gordon calls Frank, and he says, actually, my name is Mr. Frank. That's going to be important later on. It's one of those where it's kind of like, we run the show here, not you. So it's kind of establishing dominance to a degree. And then in turn, of course, you end up coming across Billy Sampson. Now, a lot of you guys may recall from the previous video that we did that Billy Sampson was basically the guy who killed 8 people, and that ultimately he was put in here. Now, of course, we learned a little more behind the scenes that he essentially took the rap for his family, and that he has been provided this cell in a secure wing of Arkham that was built explicitly for him, so he could basically spend his days in Arkham Asylum in the lap of luxury. And so this is when you end up coming across Jeremiah Arkham. Now, as most of you guys know, Jeremiah Arkham, this guy was just sleazy, right? Like this, you could look at that guy and tell there was something off about him, right? And he was always just a little suspicious. And that's one of the things that you kind of get here is that when you have Jim Gordon talking to Arkham, he's like, look, man, I get this guy Billy Sampson did some stuff, but this guy's drugged out beyond his own imagination, right? Like this guy is never gonna hurt anybody. Like you literally filled him up with all kinds of different drugs. I mean, this guy would have to go cold turkey for months in order to get himself cleared up. And by that point in time, he would probably die of shock if you shined a light in his eyes, right? I mean, like this guy's gone, right? I mean, there's no way he's gonna go back to any real measure of being normal. So take him out of this wing and put the Joker in here instead. And the reason why is because Commissioner Gordon, almost immediately after he met the Joker, began to realize there was something different about that guy. And that's something that he's been constantly trying to reiterate to all the people who are here, to Jeremiah Arkham, to Mr. Frank, even to like Harvey Dent, and even to the court itself, right? To the police department, to the higher ranking officials. This guy is not some average dude who committed some crimes and did some stuff. This guy's a serious threat, right? This guy's a legitimate deal, and you have to treat him that way. You can't just throw him in some section of Arkham Asylum with no real measure of security beyond what you would provide for anybody else out there and just call it a day. He's not some crazy person who refuses to wear green because that's how the CIA finds him. This guy's nuts. This guy's got problems, right? So again, it's one of these things where even Arkham goes as far as to say, look, like we're not taking him out of this cell. The whole reason why this cell exists is because his brother donated a ton of money to Arkham Asylum, and this cell was one of the conditions, and his brother staying in here is one of the conditions. So the only way to get him to move is to get his brother to ask him to be moved. And so you have this kind of conversation between Jim Gordon and Billy Sampson's brother. And Billy Sampson's brother just kind of shuts this down with a quickness. He's like, look, man, I don't really care, right? Like this guy is going to be taken care of. That's just the way it is. There's not going to be any kind of situation where he's moved or anything like that. I don't care what case you make. This guy's not going anywhere, right? He's staying exactly where he is, and that's all there is to it. And so what you end up getting is Commissioner Gordon, who basically spends the night with the Joker. Now, after 11 minutes of recording, we get to this bit of the whole thing with the Joker himself, right? Because it's one of the cool things. It's kind of a slow bit of a story here. Commissioner Gordon stays behind at Arkham Asylum and decides to watch the Joker because he sees him as being so incredibly dangerous. More so than that, there's a point where like all these guys just kind of come running out of the cafeteria, and when Jim Gordon goes in there, he's like, what in the heck is going on? And he's like, where's the Joker at? And Mr. Frank's like, he's in the cafeteria, and the Joker's just sitting there, right? Just eating some cake. And he's like, Captain Gordon, what a lovely surprise. I didn't know you were mentally ill. What happened to your head, man? Like, it's just one of these things where the Joker's just kind of there and doing stuff. More so than that, where he's eating this pie, right? Just kind of eating this dessert. Mr. Frank is like, you got to go back, right? And even Commissioner Gordon's like, you got to go back to your cell. And Joker says, well, Francis, I'm still hungry. And then Gordon's like, no, his name's Mr. Frank. And then Mr. Frank responds, actually, he's correct. My name is Francis. Right off the bat, Joker's manipulating people, right? That's the nature of the Joker. He's the most extreme version of a sociopath. He's not a psychopath, right? That's one of the important distinctions. If you go and you read the DSM, Joker does not qualify as a psychopath. He qualifies as a sociopath, an extreme sociopath, but a sociopath with psychosis nonetheless. And so it's one of these things where like Commissioner Gordon starts to realize this guy's basically, he's been manipulating everybody the entire time. Harvey Dent, the court systems, judge, the whole 9 yards, like everybody's been manipulated by the Joker. And the Joker tries that to a degree on Commissioner Gordon. But that's one of the things to know is that even in the early days of the Joker, right, these early depictions here, that he really hasn't changed all that much in relation to how he functions. That he's still manipulative, he's still full of tricks and lies and things like that, but it's done in a very, very smooth and very, very low-key way, right? It's not hypnotism, we're looking to my eyes, it's not anything like that, right? It's just using wordplay and getting under people's skin and, getting a feel for them, and in some ways, even making himself extremely approachable. That's one of the things about the Joker. He's highly charismatic. That's how he managed to swindle Harley Quinn, right? Was just being an exceedingly charismatic person that basically told her everything she wanted to hear and made himself to look like a great guy, a victim who's been abused by Batman, and then suddenly the two of them were just kind of caught in a whole scheme together, and they were working together for years and years and years. And that's one of the things that he says to Commissioner Gordon is, damn, like, I'm really in your head, aren't I? Like, I was kidding before, but like, it's true, right? And you can't figure out why, can you? And so what happens is Gordon just like kind of positions a chair that just sits outside the cell of the Joker, and that's when you get like this amazing monologue from the Joker. That's one of the things. If the Joker's written right, dude, he's amazing. If he's written bad, it's terrible, right? It's absolutely awful. But when he's written well, he's written well. And that's what you get here, right? Like, it's one of these things where he's kind of like, I think I know why I'm in your head all the time, Gordon, because you live in a world that is a normal world, right? You see the world as being a normal place. You look at criminals and you see people who rob and people who steal and people who kill and, do all kinds of different things. And that there are some legitimately bad people out there, but most people who commit crimes out of desperation, right? Like, who wouldn't kill for their kids? Who wouldn't steal for their kids? Who wouldn't do any of those things to protect their family? And so you can see a little piece of yourself in all these people here. There's criminals out there that just piss you off. And so in your desire to kill them, you imagine what it would be like if you just killed that guy. So you could see yourself in the face of a murderer, right? You could see yourself in these different circumstances. But you look at me and you can't see yourself in me. You can't see yourself as being a part of me. There's nothing about me that you find remotely relatable. I take pleasure in the suffering of other people. And there's nothing about that you can relate to. And in the beginning, you took solace in that. You took comfort in the fact that you could not see yourself in the face of a man like me, because it means you could never become a man like me. He's a freak. He's an anomaly. It's one of these weird things that are out there. But then suddenly you started to look at me and you started to realize, how does a person become that way? How does a person get to a point where they are a normal functioning human being that exists in this world and their parents give them a moral compass and they go forward from there to becoming someone like the Joker? And the more you think about that, the more that you consider that, the more you begin to realize, I'm just the first, that something bad is coming to Gotham City. Yeah, I'm not this big hurricane that you're afraid of. I'm just the first dark cloud on the horizon, but it's only ever gonna get worse. It's only ever gonna get worse and worse and worse and worse. And that's when it suddenly occurs to Commissioner Gordon, the whole deal with Falcone and Harvey Dent. And so he basically, like literally tells this guy, keep an eye on the door, do not let Joker get out. He runs out to the police car, tries to radio Harvey. He can't really pick up a signal on the radio. And so he's like, okay, fine, whatever. So he ends up going back into Arkham, and like the guy who's supposed to be standing there is gone. He ends up having to go to the bathroom, but the Joker's not in his cell anymore. And so of course, like literally you have Commissioner Gordon just starts running through the entirety of Arkham, only to find the Joker sitting in the kitchen eating some pie. And so from there, it's again just one of these things where the Joker's kind of talking to Commissioner Gordon and seemingly talking to him all night long. And so of course, Gordon wakes up at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and then of course you have Jeremiah Arkham and them who are there who are like, okay man, like it's time for you to go home, right? Like you need to leave here. But as as he's leaving, he ends up, kind of hearing this radio broadcast where there is a search for the Kelly Tower shooting, and that it's expanding beyond the original scope. And so when Gordon gets to where he was supposed to meet with Harvey Dent, that's when he finds out it really was a trap, right? It really was a trap set by Falcone on behalf of this guy. We don't know how deep it went, if this guy was supposed to get busted in order to like set the cops up in a trap, but regardless, Harvey Dent ended up taking a handful of guys to the towers and they all got shot up. It was a massacre. And Harvey Dent immediately lashes out at Jim Gordon. So this right here explains why Harvey Dent doesn't like Gordon. But he basically lashes out and he's like, had it not been for you, if you had been there, then none of this would have happened, right? Like, you should have been there, you were supposed to be here, all of our guys got massacred. Like, you were supposed to be the one that provided the voice of reason. You've got this just kind of scent when it comes to these kinds of things. You were supposed to give us a perspective, right? At the very least, you would have known that we should have pulled out. We needed you, and you were nowhere to be found because you couldn't let the Joker thing go. And so, of course, Jim Gordon ends up basically leaving and heading back home, and he has this really, really cool kind of a little speech to himself where he says, Harvey Dent is a good man. I can't blame him for what he said, but he's wrong, and the Joker was right. I don't know what it is, I don't understand it, but something awful is growing in Gotham. And if we want to stand any chance against it, then I was exactly where I needed to be last night. And this is the important thing, because that night was the anniversary between him and his wife. He basically blew off his anniversary and the entirety of his family to babysit the Joker. What started out as a concern has now turned into an obsession with Commissioner Gordon. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.